Hello, what's up? Welcome in, Hoge and Jahns, back with you again. This time, I am joined by the one and only Dan Pompei. We're here to discuss the passing of Virginia McCaskey. She passed away today, Thursday, February 6th, at 102 years old. Dan wrote a beautiful obituary for us on The Athletic. Please check that out on theathletic.com. Dan, thank you for joining the show. I guess let's begin with this. With Virginia, what's the best way to encapsulate everything she meant to the Chicago Bears organization?
Well, I think it's hard to do that, Adam. People say what was her contribution to the team or what was her, footprint on the league. And, the way I would answer that is I think the NFL, as we all know, is a league that kind of is devoid of humanity. And she provided humanity. She was, I think, a great example of how to live a life, how to comport yourself, how to deal with people, how to set your priorities. And, in the NFL, I think that's something that really has kind of gotten lost, especially as the league has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. Um, I remember talking to her once. She hated the phrase "next man up" because she felt like it was so cold and calloused, and it didn't really talk about the human being. She was all about the human being. She was all about personal relationships and getting to know people, coaches, players, whoever was in her path. And she touched a lot of lives, both in the NFL and in the community in her 102 years.
Yeah, an amazing life. I was always amazed that there was this direct connection between modern football and quite literally the start of football of the NFL through Virginia McCaskey. She has seen so much, this game grow and change so much. I just found it so amazing that there's so many stories of like her stories of seeing these different games at different points, like in the history of the NFL. Like, did that ever stick with you?
Yeah, I think there's something like 30 some games in the 105-year history of the Chicago Bears that she has not been alive for. She went to her first game when she was 2 years old. She was on the Red Grange tour. Red Grange carried her in his arms. And, she saw every generation of Bears teams, every championship she was at. Every time the Bears played a big game, I think that you could say every big game they ever played, probably she was at, because she was at most games in the history. Later years, she traveled less with the team these last couple of years, but for many, many years, she traveled with the team. The only time she didn't prior to that was when she was a mother of a young family. Of course, she had 11 children, so she couldn't always go to games, when she was busy with motherhood duties. But she's just been a part of the whole years, all the decades of Bears football, and it really is amazing to think that anyone, there's nobody like that in all of sports who could say that about being a part of a franchise for as long as she has.
Yeah, that Red Grange tour. If our Bears listeners or Bears viewers aren't familiar with that, that was like, what was it called? The barnstorming tour, where the Bears literally traveled from town to town to town, right? Like with Red Grange as their superstar.
Yeah, it was, basically the beginning of pro football as we know it, because that's the tour that really kind of set the nation on fire with a love for football. And it was a great tour in terms of drumming up interest and showing the country what football was all about. And Red Grange, the star player from University of Illinois, the halfback, was kind of the selling point because everyone wanted to see him. He was so special. He's probably like the Saquon Barkley of his day. And, he was a part of the growth at the grassroots level of football, and she was there to witness it.
I think she shared this story in the Bears centennial book, where the Bears, I forget who they played. So take us through the story where they played at Chicago Stadium. Was it after the circus was there and it still smelled like the circus?
Yes, that's true. It was in the 1940s, and in those days, the Bears had to play where they could play, and they had to play this championship game in the stadium. And the circus had just vacated, and there was sawdust on the floor and on the field, and as you said, there was an aroma because there were certain things left behind. In those days, circuses had animals. I guess they don't anymore. But in those days, they had elephants and lions and bears and all kinds of real bears. And, some of them left reminders that they were there.
Yeah, ones that don't tend to stick. When I was writing my Bears book and I started asking players about Virginia McCaskey, Charles Tillman told me a story that I thought of almost immediately today, um, uh, after news of her passing came out. That when his daughter was going through her heart issues, her heart condition, that he received a handwritten letter from Virginia McCaskey, and he was always touched by like what that was. It wasn't an email. It was more than a phone call. It wasn't a text message like everyone delivers nowadays. It was this heartfelt, handwritten letter to him, addressing what's going on in his family. I'm sure you've heard other stories from other players about such letters or such connections that she formed with them too, I imagine.
Well, yeah, I could even tell you a personal story about how I received, some of her warmth and kindness. I really won't get into it here, but um, when we were writing that centennial scrapbook that you talked about, Don Pearson and I sat with her in her living room for about 20 hours over one summer. It was, a bunch of different interviews. And we talked to her about, all the different aspects of her life and her, her career with the Bears. And it was amazing. One of the things that stood out to me was that, we would ask her about a football player from the 40s or the 50s or the 60s, Dick Butkus. And what would she talk about? She wouldn't talk about a great play he made or, a way that he helped them win a big game or, what he did for the team in a certain season. She would talk about, that player's wife or that player's kid or a time that she was at a picnic with the family. She has great memories or had great memories of, going back to the humanity, just the real life contact with all of these people and the people who were important to them.
She was really close with the Peyton family, and you shared this about Brian Piccolo, his story. Can you kind of take us through what the Piccolo story kind of meant to her and how that affected her life?
Yeah, she was very close with the Piccolos. Her husband, late husband Ed, was very close with Brian Piccolo and Gail Stairs. Of course, he was a part of Piccolo's treatment in New York, medical treatment when he had cancer, and so she grew very close to the family, and she was just devastated when he died, and she couldn't understand it because he was a young, vibrant man with a beautiful family, wife, and 3 daughters. And she said it even led her to question her faith. But eventually she got over that and ended up helping Joy Piccolo and her girls start their charity. And the Bears have been a great contributor to the charity for now it's been decades. And she's also remained very close to Joy and the girls and been a part of their lives. Matter of fact, I even heard from Tracy, Joy and Brian's daughter today, on social media because she had read my story and reached out to me about that.
I didn't know this about Virginia until I read your story today. That the NFL, well, the Pro Football Hall of Fame, I should say, tried to honor her with the Pioneer Award, but she declined that.
Yes, yeah. I mean, and that's so much like her. I mean, Adam, from being around the team for as many years as you have, that she strictly operated in the shadows, and it was a part mostly of her humility. She didn't want to be center stage. Of course, she never wanted to be the owner of the Bears. She never wanted to be making decisions about the Bears. Never was supposed to be. It was always supposed to be Muggs Hallis who was making the decisions. Of course, he died at a young age in the 1970s, and she was the only child left. So she ended up being kind of thrust into this position she was really not comfortable with. But even when she was there, she never wanted to appear like she was the person who was, telling people what to do or taking credit, taking glory. She wanted to stay in the background and let other people have those roles or be credited or blamed or whatever.
I was always struck by, well, she owned 80% of the team, but she was never the chairman. She was the secretary of the board of directors for a long time. I'm curious, like, what did you always make of that for someone who's covered the team since the 80s, like her decision to stay in the background as opposed to all of these owners who nowadays are, well, everywhere. They're on TV, they're on the radio, they're on social media, they're making decisions for their football operations when maybe they shouldn't be. I'm just curious how you viewed her role, especially as someone who owned 80% of the team.
She probably was the last of her kind, Adam. I think she knew what she didn't know, and she wanted to put people in position to make decisions who she felt knew more than she did. Didn't always work out well, in the history of the team. She obviously appointed her son Michael to be the president for many years. They won the Super Bowl 20, under his watch, and then they kind of fell apart a little bit. She ended up replacing Michael in, I'm trying to think the year, it was the late 90s, promoting Ted Phillips, and then eventually promoting her other son, George, to the position of basically, team president. And it hurt her a great deal that the Bears struggled so much under her watch. She took it very hard. She took it very personally. But, again, she didn't feel like it was within her jurisdiction. She didn't have the area of expertise to step in and start making decisions like many team owners do.
How about this? Can you take us through the enshrinement night, the party of Brian Urlacher? Maybe build the scene for us when Virginia McCaskey walks in right past midnight. It was a late one and stays for an hour.
Yeah, so the reason it was past midnight is because the Bears played the Hall of Fame game that night in Canton, Ohio. And, it was a late game. And by the time they got over to the party, the party had been going on for hours. And, he had, it was a heck of a party for a lot of people from the organization there, his teammates. He had country music stars, and it was quite a party. But she walked in at 12:15, and it was like the red carpet rolled out, and everyone stopped what they were doing. Here comes Mrs. McCaskey. That's what everyone called her, Mrs. McCaskey, unless you're a member of her family. They called her Mrs. McCaskey. So she walked in, and I think she sat down, and everyone kind of went up to her and paid respects. And she really was the star of the show, even though it was Brian Urlacher's party being inducted. Even Brian and his wife and everyone went up to her, and people were getting autographs, taking pictures with her, and she was just very gracious and kind to everybody. And it was quite a scene. And she hung in there. I don't remember exactly what time she left. I would guess it was probably something like 1:30 in the morning.
Yeah, wow. Wow. That's quite when you first wrote that story a few years ago. I love that scene, that visual of her becoming the ultimate celebrity at that game. Dan, before we let you go, in writing that book, the Centennial book, because you spent so much time with her, I'm curious if there's anything that really struck you or really resonated with you, whether it's a story of the past or just that interaction for so long that you and Don had with her in writing that book.
Well, I think one of the things that was interesting was just where she lived in a very modest house in the suburbs. If you think about the house that Dan Snyder lived in on the Potomac River, or the house that Jerry Jones might live in Dallas, it's probably as far away from something like that that you could possibly imagine. But it was all she needed. She wasn't a person who required a lot of things. She wasn't. That wasn't important to her. What was important to her was her faith in her family, most importantly, and people. And she did a lot to promote Christianity. She gave away a lot of rosaries. She gave away a lot of nativity scenes. She would always, be willing to talk about that, probably more willing to talk about her faith than she would be about her football team, although she was always gracious about that too. If people ask questions about, what's going on with the Bears, or what do you think about this, or what do you think about that? But she really had, she was a person, I think, who had priorities in order, and in a world now where priorities are probably getting skewed more and more, and it's easy to get skewed, especially when you talk about football, because it's so important to so many people and they get so passionate about it. But she kind of was a grounding force, and she brought it all together and kind of brought it back to life.
Yeah, she lived in Des Plaines, which is a nearby suburb uh, of where I live, and we obviously have the Notre Dame connection. Her sons went to Notre Dame. I went to Notre Dame. Um, there's always rumblings and rumors and stories about Virginia McCaskey, Mrs. McCaskey, making donations here or there. You'd always hear, I don't know, stories, little, hey, did you hear this about what Mrs. McCaskey did or she gave that church? And like, I was happy that you put that in your story because you've always heard stories of her charity in that regard.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's again easy to overlook. But things that were important to her, she was going to be a real champion of the cause for, and she did that. She donated a lot of things to a lot of different people, and she was very generous in that regard, and she was happy to be able to spread the wealth in that way.
Well, Dan, I can't thank you enough for sharing your stories on our podcast today. I can't thank you enough for your time. Obviously, I think I know that Virginia McCaskey, Mrs. McCaskey, meant a lot to you. She obviously meant a lot to the McCaskey family, the Bears, their players, everyone who works for the team and the NFL. So, thank you so much for your time. I'm sure we'll be able to catch up soon enough.
Okay, thanks, Adam. Good to be with you.
So special thanks to Dan Pompei. Be sure to check out his obituary on Virginia McCaskey on theathletic.com. Dan is a Hall of Fame person, a Hall of Fame voter, and a Hall of Fame writer. So please always check out his work. He was a mentor of mine as well. I'd also like to express my deepest heartfelt condolences to the McCaskey family on their loss. I think everyone in the NFL world knows how important Virginia McCaskey was to them, to the NFL, to everyone in the world of football. So that'll do it for this edition of the Hoge and Jahns podcast. We will be back next week. Again, like we said in our previous episode, please enjoy the Super Bowl. Be safe, take care, and we'll see you next time. See ya.